Thank you for joining us on today's episode of Tax Matters. On February 25th, 2023, Nigerians went to the polls to elect a new president and members of the National Assembly. Again, on March 18th, elections were held to usher in new executives and legislators at the state level. At the federal level, the candidate of the APC, Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu, was elected president. May 29, 2023 will usher in the new administration at the federal and state levels. Revenue, especially from taxes, remains a major driver of economic development all over the world. As our contribution to efforts aimed at setting an agenda for the new administration, the next 2-3 episodes of Tax Matters will be centered around setting an agenda for Mr. President in the area of taxation. To get this done, we have spoken to Nigerians, the voters. The voice of the people, they say, is the voice of God. But before we share with you what we brought from the streets, let's go over to our tax education corner. Today, we are looking at the National Information Technology Development Levy, which came into being in the year 2007 upon the passage of the NITDA Act, Act number 28 of 2007. The Act provides that GSM service providers and all telecommunication companies, cyber companies and internet providers, pension managers and pension-related companies, banks and other financial institutions and insurance companies with an annual turnover of 100 million naira and above shall pay a levy of 1% of their profit before tax, and such levy paid shall be tax deductible. The revenue from the levy is intended to support the planning, development, and promotion of the use of information technology in Nigeria. The Federal Inland Revenue Service is empowered by the Act to assess, collect the levy, and remit to the National Information Technology Development Fund. The FIRS, while assessing a liable company for company's income tax, also assesses such a company for the levy due. For the National Information Technology Development Levy, a company is expected to file its tax returns within 6 months from the end of the accounting year, while filing for company's income tax as a self-assessment filer, or the levy shall be due and payable within 60 days after FIRS has served notice of assessment on a company. In the last 5 years, the NITDA levy has contributed a sum of 86.92 billion naira to the fund, as can be seen on your screen. There you are. If your company belongs to any of the sectors on your screen, then you are liable to NITDA levy. And remember, the NITDA levy is not new. It was introduced way back in the year 2007. Now to the agenda for Mr. President. In the build-up to the 2023 elections, the contesting parties released their manifestos. The People's Democratic Party, in its manifesto titled Covenant with the People of Nigeria, states under Theme 1, Economic Transformation for Prosperity, that Nigeria's fiscal position is precarious, uncertain, and disruptive of budgets and economic plans. Revenue is small at 8% of GDP and subject to wild fluctuations affecting budget size and performance. This poses significant risks to Nigeria's long-term growth and development. To address this anomaly, the PDP promised under the section How We Will Get There to work towards achieving the lowest corporate income tax rate in Africa and make Nigeria one of the most attractive destinations for foreign direct investment. Ensure that the granting of qualification for tax incentives is automatic and according to predetermined, uniform, and clear criteria. Simplify personal and corporate tax filings and create a transparent corporate tax register. We shall promote the harmonization of state and federal tax laws to avoid overtaxing small and medium-sized businesses. We shall pursue an aggressive regime of tax credits for critical sectors of the economy. Intensify efforts to enhance the internal revenue generating capacity of all 3 tiers of government. A tax to GDP ratio of 7 to 8% is unacceptable. We shall ensure that by 2030, this is increased to 20%. We shall support the states to reform their revenue collection agencies to improve tax compliance as well as their capacity to tap non-oil revenue sources. In its own manifesto titled, Our Pact with Nigerians, Creating a New Nigeria, the Labour Party, under the subheading, Fiscal Restructuring, promised to functionally redesign our fiscal architecture such that revenue mobilization and allocation will be bottom-up like most federations across the world, and the federal government will now rely on revenues from taxes collected by states to drive the right incentive for efficiency and optimal allocation of resources. The states will be allowed to leverage their comparative advantages and contribute to national development, thus reducing states' dependence on the federation account to fund developmental projects and empower them to become net contributors to the national economy. Our government will expand the country's tax net and base. The tax system and database will be harmonized across states' internal revenue services and the Federal Inland Revenue Service. To achieve this, we will A. Empower the federal and state ministries of finance to harmonize taxes and the tax database. B. Authorize the Joint Tax Board to identify all payable taxes and fees by companies and individuals. C. Consolidate all tax database into one centralized system. D. Determine the tax delineation, that is, which form of taxes is receivable by the states or federal government. And E. Work with states and communities to effectively combat the nefarious activities of non-state actors and institutionalized brigadage, notorious for huge revenue leakages, exploration and exploitation, which undermine investment and development in the real sector. On its own part, the All Progressive Congress, under the heading Tax Reforms, contained in its manifesto titled Renewed Hope, states that during times of economic weakness, increasing taxation is counterproductive. Higher taxes drain an already weakened private sector, inviting possible economic contraction and higher unemployment. Against this background, the party promised as follows. We shall review the corporate tax system and deploy technology and effective policies to better rationalize the system. Our aim shall be to create a progressive tax regime, plug harmful loopholes, enhance efficiency of collection, and give the people a greater sense of responsibility in relation to their taxes. Under the subheading, Optimization of Government Revenue, the party pledged to deploy the same skills and expertise used in Lagos State to generate record levels of internally generated revenue, create wealth and attract investment. We shall also improve and significantly expand the current administration's efforts to generate revenue by reducing leakages in the financial system and create an enabling environment to expand the private sector initiatives. Now to our respondents.
The elections have come and gone, and a new administration will be coming in on May 29th. Now, what advice do you have for the incoming administration in the area of taxation?
Okay, my advice for the new administration when it comes to the area of taxation is that in as much as the citizens are paying their tax, they should ensure that they are able to get value for what they are paying their tax for. I will advise them that they should put more effort and let people pay this tax with ease and happiness.
When individuals, companies, corporate organizations, multinational companies pay their taxes and wages as at when due, we should expect transformation, a big one. in our country called Nigeria.
We want improvement. We want to see change in our country. Give us infrastructure, give us good education, like light. We want all those things to be like a foreign standard that a lot of investors will come down to Nigeria and invest in our country.
Sir, the elections have come and gone, and a new administration will be coming in on May 29. Now, what advice do you have for the incoming administration in the area of taxation?
Tax is actually important, everybody knows that, but the new incoming administration should realize that business has to be supported. It's only when a business is supported well that you can think of paying tax, okay? I will advise that the environment should be more business friendly, okay? And I think tax rebate and all these incentives could be of help. I'm not disputing that they should not collect tax. It's important that the people pay tax. It's very important. But at the same time, people will be more willing to pay tax if their businesses thrive. I remember in Lagos State, the Fashola administration, people were even willing to come out and pay their taxes because they saw the dividends of what they are paying. Everybody could see it.
The advice I have for the incoming government on tax level is they should create more awareness for the Nigerians. If people are paying tax, are they getting their value back? Because the moment they start paying tax, then the government continue to be using that money, tax payment, to be developing our country, and our country continue to be getting better, like roads, like lights.
We also spoke to Mr. Taiwo Oyedele, a regular guest on this program. Before setting the agenda for Mr. President, Mr. Oyedele touched on a few other germane issues. Take a listen. So we are looking at the tax system in Nigeria. What are your thoughts about the tax system in Nigeria?
I'll say the tax system in Nigeria is evolving. So it's an evolution. In a way, we have made some progress, but there's still a lot that we need to do. So if you think over the past decade, for example, we've had instances with the tax policy. So first it was done in 2012. We had a revision in 2017, and there has been concerted effort in trying to implement it, particularly with the Finance Acts that we had every year. But I think overall, it's fair to say that we have made some progress. We've seen adjustment to something like minimum wage being exempted from tax. That was because we were lazy for so many years, because when Naira used to be stronger than dollars and even pound sterlings, we had some exemptions that made sense. For more than 40 years, we did nothing, and those amounts became even very annoying. But then we've seen some changes made. We're not there, but we're making progress.
What more needs to be done?
That's a good question. I think we need to take a step back and say that if you have a car that is very old, I remember then when I was a little boy, my dad bought a Volkswagen car. So the noise was like a generator at those times. Imagine having a car like that and you keep repairing it, you patch it, you pan a bit, you replace the engine. So maybe it's a time now to buy a new car. So Nigeria needs to take that step back and say, let's redesign the tax system. I do think that generally the burden of tax is disproportionately on the most vulnerable people. And even the Vice President said when we're launching VATs, right, that about 96% of the revenue was coming from PAYE. That's an aberration. That's not what you find anywhere in the world. And I've said many times to say that there hasn't been any country in the history of the world that has become rich by taxing poverty. So you need to protect people who are vulnerable because they need to survive before they can give back to society by way of taxes. So we need to redesign it so that the burden falls in the right places. And more importantly, there has to be an emphasis on transparency by government and government agencies. And number two, there has to be fiscal exchange. It's a social contract. You apply to lead us, we give you our money, you use it to take care of us. And then there has to be a lot in terms of prudence.
What do you think needs to be done to raise or increase the tax to GDP ratio of Nigeria?
Yeah, good question. So I'll say three things are very important. So these three things I'm going to tell you now can easily increase our tax to GDP ratio by more than 200% within the next 4 years. So which means we get to the African average of 18 to 20%, right? Number one, tax harmonization. The number of taxes we have in Nigeria, nobody knows, to be honest. It's unbelievable. Officially, based on the Taxes and Levies Act, it's around 66. Unofficially, over 200. Even though 99% of the tax revenue we generate in Nigeria today across all levels of government comes from less than 10 taxes. So we've created so many others to frustrate the people, to get them to be discouraged about the tax system. People are paying so much, government is collecting so little because the rest of it is getting lost in the middle due to corruption, leakages, and inefficiency. That has to also stop. Harmonize the taxes so that there are few of them. My recommendation is amend the constitution and say different level of government, you can impose taxes, but when you are done imposing them, they should never exceed a single digit, right? So that's one harmonization in terms of the taxes. There's another harmonization in terms of the collecting agencies. At the federal government level alone, in the 2023 budget, they have 63 MDAs that they've asked to go and collect revenue. That is an invitation to chaos. That's why you have the Federal Inland Revenue Service. Let FRS alone collect all revenue for the federal government. At the state level, only Internal Revenue Service to collect all the revenue for the state. If you do all of that, you cut out the patronage. Number two is to use technology for tax intelligence. The reason why people pay taxes in developed countries like the US and UK is not because those people are angels and we are devils. No. Human behavior everywhere in the world is the same. If there will be consequences for doing the wrong thing, people would not do it. If there won't be consequences for doing the wrong thing, people do what is convenient. It's not convenient to pay taxes, so they won't pay. So if you connect the intelligence you have within the economy, you're buying a car, you're buying a property, you're traveling abroad, you're going to university, you're buying FX, you open a bank account, you're using your ATM card to almost every economic activity that you do today, government has a hand in it. But those hands are not connected. When you connect it, somebody will say, actually, Taiwo, from our records, you are worth 2 million naira, but you only pay 5,000 naira tax. Can you reconcile it for us? So that intelligence will help you to collect the right amount of tax. And that's what I call data for tax or tax intelligence. Number three, and the last one, of the most important things that government needs to do is coordination. You need coordination not only of the tax and fiscal policies, you need the coordination with other policies, including monetary policy. See the central bank with Naira redesign, Naira confiscation, and scarcity. Every single country that I know in the world that has done something with their currency, one of their top objectives is to raise more revenue, because when people are bringing those stolen money, you collect the intelligence and say, by the way, this is your 50 million naira. You have not seen you in the tax system. So you need that coordination at the federal level, all the agencies, all the policy organs, as well as with sub-national. Because somebody can tell you, I've paid my taxes in Lagos when you see them in the FCT, even though they haven't paid. So you need both vertical and horizontal coordination.
How can we now deepen voluntary tax compliance among the citizenry?
Voluntary compliance is an interesting conversation. Two things or three things will drive voluntary compliance. One is consequences for evasion. So even if you don't like government and you're a stubborn person, the fear of going to jail can make you comply, right? So that's where consequence management is important. So there has to be consequences for not complying. Number two is what I mentioned before. Give me something in return for the taxes I pay. I don't want to pay all my taxes and then I have to contribute to fix the road in my estate, dig my borehole, provide generator, right? Contribute for primary school where my kids attend. It's not fair because that means I'm paying implicit taxes in addition to the statutory taxes. It can make me a poor person. So give me something in return for the taxes that I pay. And the last one, which is also very important, is we did a study at the Nigeria Economy Summit Group on tax morale. And we saw the morale in Nigeria was very low. Tax morale, by the way, is your willingness to pay taxes and the belief that evasion is wrong. So we saw that 83% of Nigerian adults think it's okay to not pay their taxes. So when we asked them why, the number one reason they gave is they do not trust government. So the third point I want to make is you need to build trust with the people. Trust is not something you can decree and command. You have to earn it, and it takes time, and it requires consistency.
It is an offense punishable by a fine of 10 million naira and or imprisonment for any agency of the federal government other than FIRS to demand for books or returns for the purposes of tax. It is also an offense to carry out the function of assessment, collection or enforcement of tax, or pay any portion of tax revenue to any person or into any account other than the relevant accounts designated by the Constitution or relevant laws of the National Assembly. It pays to pay your tax. This message is brought to you by the Federal Inland Revenue Service, FIRS.
Now a new administration will be coming in on May 29th, and looking at where we are and where we are going, a lot is expected. We would like you to set an agenda for the new administration.
Yeah, you know, if you allow me to set an agenda in different areas, we'll be here for the whole day. But let me focus on the fiscal space, you know, tax and fiscal policy. One is you have to budget better. So what do I mean by budgeting better? You insist that you must do refineries. They haven't worked since 1993. How are they going to work now? Because the reason why the refineries are not working is not because Nigeria does not have the capacity to do ordinary refinery. It's because of corruption. There are people who are benefiting from the fact that we're importing them. Those guys won't let it work until you deal with the corruption. So why don't you just let private sector run it? Don't borrow money and use that money to do projects that we can't lay our hands on. So the right priority of projects, efficiency of spending, speed of completion, and quality. So you need to do that, and the more people see that, there was a time in Lagos State when Fashola did a lot, and people were asking, I need to go and register and pay tax for once. You know, they'll put flowers by the divide of the road, and they'll put it there. They remind you it's taxpayers' money. I like that concept. They are telling you it's your money. So we need to budget better. Number two, we need to collect better. So what are we collecting? Who are we collecting from? Who is collecting it? We need to have those conversations all over again and redesign the whole process of collecting taxes and administration generally. Then you need to spend better. So you budget better, you collect better, and you spend better. Now, spending in itself requires a lot of transparency. I want to be able to go to the website of any government ministry. Not only should you tell me about your budget, tell me when you are spending it. I want to go to the website of Ministry of Finance, of Agric, of Works, and see all the projects you've awarded. You know, even people that submitted the bid, how you awarded this. So if I want to interrogate what Lagos State is doing with Blue Line, right? Maybe it's inflated. Do I know? Who is providing that information? Do you see the audited account for many of the states? So spending better means not only are you prudent, you demonstrate it by being transparent, right? And then another thing you need to do is coordinate. You need to coordinate better. And then finally, you need to ensure that, you know, the leadership by example, let me call it setting the right tone. Mr. President himself has to lead by example. President Obama and many presidents of the US before him, apart from Donald Trump, would not only comply with their tax application, they will publish. So if you go on the internet now, you Google Barack Obama's tax return, you will see it there when he was president. So Mr. President has to lead by example. Then you go to the level of government agencies, government and enterprises, ministry, everybody has to comply. If I'm Mr. President and you head one agency or you're a minister and you don't pay taxes, I'll just fire you. It's easy to fire people when you're the president. You don't need to be nice about it, but you're setting an example so that they'll know this is not a joke, right? When you lead from the top and you set the right tone, then everybody else will follow.
It's on that note that we really thank you, Mr. Oyedele. It's always a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you for having me.
There you are. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. The voice of the people is the voice of God. This series continues next week. What would you consider as your own agenda for Mr. President? Let's have your contribution by phone call, by text, on YouTube, on Facebook, and on Twitter. Thank you for watching. See you next week.